12 Steps of HACCP Implementation. This film provides a detailed overview of the stages or steps of HACCP introduction. 12 stages of HACCP includes a set of measures that allows one to establish and later maintain HACCP or Food Safety Management System during all food production processes. These would include items such as the following. 1. Establishment of HACCP work team. 2. Preparation of product descriptions. 3. Determining the objectives and types of product use. 4. Development of a flowchart. 5. Approval of the flowchart at the site of production. 6. Identification and analysis of potential hazards and defining control actions. Principle 1. 7. Identification of critical control points. Principle 2. 8. Identification of critical limits for each critical control point. Principle 3. 9. Development of supervision or monitoring system for each critical control point. Principle 4. 10. Establishment of corrective actions. Principle 5. 11. Establishment of verification or inspection procedures. Principle 6. 12. Establishment of documentation and registration system. Principle 7. Stage 1. Establishment of the HACCP work team. Specialists and technical workers can be involved in the HACCP work group if they are aware of biological, chemical, or physical hazards associated with the particular product group. They are responsible for the technological process of the product in question or are directly involved in it. And they have practical knowledge of hygiene requirements and the operation of production devices and equipment. One person can perform several tasks. If the company lacks specialists who possess the required knowledge, external experts can be attracted or other sources can be used. Consultations, available instructions of good hygiene practice. Stage 2. Preparation of product descriptions. Comprehensive description of finished products must be created by providing all the required information on content, for instance, on the raw materials, components, additives, possibly allergens. Origin of ingredients and raw materials, which can help identify particular threats. Structure, physical and chemical properties, for instance, whether it is a solid or liquid substance, jelly, emulsion, moisture content, pH level, water activity. Processing, for instance, heating, freezing, drying, brining, smoking, and the degree thereof. Packaging, for instance, hermetic packaging, vacuum packaging, modified atmosphere, and labeling. Conditions of storage and distribution, as well as transportation and processing. Scheduled storage time, for instance, use by and best before. Instructions for use. Any applicable microbiological and chemical criteria. Stage 3. Determining the objectives and types of product use. HACCP work group must determine the use of the product in customer and consumer target groups. In special cases, the suitability of the product for special groups of consumers must possibly be assessed. Stage 4. Development of a flowchart. Flowchart must contain all processes from the receipt of raw materials to launch of the end product on the market, including delays that can occur at certain stage or during transfer from one stage to the next, and technical data that are sufficient and significant for food safety, for instance, temperature and length of thermal processing. Stage 5. Approval of the flowchart at the site of production. After the preparation of the flowchart, the HACCP work team must check it and approve it at the workplace during work. Stage 6. Identification and analysis of potential hazards and defining control actions. Stage 6 conforms to Principle 1 of HACCP. HACCP team, upon the detection of hazards and performing the analysis of risks of their occurrence, must consider how probable the hazards are and how serious their harmful effects on health can be. Qualitative assessment of existing hazards. Possibility of survival or reproduction of pathogenic microorganisms and the development of impermissible chemicals in the intermediate products, finished products, production lines, or line environment. Development or preservation of toxins or other hazardous products of microbial metabolism, chemicals, physical factors, or allergens in food products. Biological, chemical, or physical contamination of raw materials, intermediate products, or final products. All of the most significant threats must be identified at each stage of the production process. Control measures must be planned in a manner that prevents or eliminates the hazard or effect thereof, or reduces the probability of the hazard to permissible levels. All actions must be described, and personnel liable for the introduction of HACCP principles must be introduced to them. Stage 7. Identification of critical control points. Critical control point is a point of reference which is required to detect, prevent, or eliminate the hazard or to reduce it to an acceptable level. This stage conforms to Principle 2 of HACCP. At this point of reference, the hazard can be identified within a short period of time. If this requires more time, for instance several days for the performance of microbiological or chemical examinations, it is not a critical control point. It is important to understand that critical control points provide an opportunity to determine one of the parameters on site, for instance, time, temperature, weight, and many other parameters that can be measured on site. If a longer investigation is required, it is not a critical control point. In certain cases, during general hazard analysis, it can be found out that no important hazard exists. In this case, no critical control points are required. In these situations, food hazards can be controlled by implementing prerequisite programs. At small companies, it is sufficient that risk analysis included in the HACCP plan practically and simply describes hazard control methods without closer examination of the type of hazard. However, such analysis must review all serious hazards and clearly define procedures for the control of such hazards, as well as corrective measures in the event of the occurrence of the hazard. Stage 8. Identification of critical limits for each critical control point conforms to Principle 3 of HACCP. Critical values that conform to value limits that are permissible in terms of safety of the particular product must be indicated when establishing each action associated with a critical control point. This limit is used to separate acceptable results from those that are unacceptable. It is determined based on observations or measurable parameters that prove that the critical point is controlled. These parameters can be temperature, time, pH level, moisture, amount of additives, preservative or salt, organoleptic parameters, for instance appearance or structure, and others. It is not always necessary to determine statistical value. This especially refers to the cases where the basis of the monitoring procedure involves, for instance, visual observation. For instance, boiling temperature of liquid food, changes of physical properties of the food during thermal processing. Stage 9. Development of supervision or monitoring system for each critical control point conforms to Principle 4 of HACCP. Monitoring or supervision system includes a set of actions that allows one to obtain confirmation, which is founded on observation and measurements to prove the fact that the critical limit values are constantly met but are not exceeded. The frequency of monitoring is determined by considering the probability of risk and the type of critical control point. Observations and measurements can be performed constantly or periodically. If not performed constantly, the frequency of monitoring must be defined, which will provide prompt information for the performance of corrective measures. Monitoring procedures can include a wide range of various actions, for instance, regular checks of cooling and heating device temperature with a thermometer, visual observation of whether skin is correctly removed during the slaughtering process, visual observation to gain assurance that the food product that is subject to thermal processing has visually detectable physical properties that confirm the respective level of thermal processing, for instance, hot steaming of the food during the entire process. The monitoring must detect deviations at critical control points and ensure prompt information for corrective actions. The correction must be implemented before the critical limit is reached. Monitoring methods, procedures of the processes, and keeping of records required for supervision at critical control points shall be described in the HACCP plan by indicating the person who performs monitoring and checks, the time when monitoring and checks are performed, and the procedures for the performance of monitoring and checks. The following must be determined at each critical point. Who shall perform monitoring and tests? When shall monitoring and tests be performed and how frequently? How, by means of what tools and methods, the monitoring and inspection shall be performed. Stage 10. Determining of corrective actions conforms to Principle 5 of HACCP. The determining of corrective actions or corrective measures at each critical control point is required to prevent any hazards, the probability of which is evidenced by approaching of critical limits or exceeding thereof. Corrective measures include indication of person or persons who are liable for the implementation of the corrective action, description of means and measures required for the correction of the observed deviation, description of actions that must be performed regarding the products that were produced during the time period when the process was not controlled, notes where information regarding implemented actions is indicated. Stage 11. Establishment of verification or inspection procedures. Verification actions conform to Principle 6 of HACCP. Verification shall be performed periodically to verify that the HACCP system operates in accordance with the plan and procedures. Verification includes the application of additional methods, procedural tests, and other assessments. Source data required for verification can be general or specific. Verification helps find answers to the questions: is it true? Is it correct? And does it ensure a safe product? Verification process and results are documented. Stage 12. Establishment of documentation and registration system. Stage 12 conforms to Principle 7 of HACCP and includes system introduction and maintenance-related documents. This film provides a brief theoretical review of the stages required for the development of the HACCP system. However, one must be aware that 12 stages are not applied in all cases. The application depends on the size of company, number of the employees in the company, type of manufactured products, and other factors. We don't work for one day. What we create today will be used for future generations. We have to be aware of how to do it and how to take care of these values responsibly.